As a bartender, I'm more accustomed to having human beings all around me kind of create a slideshow. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, and I guess why I'm here. First of all, thank you very much. And thanks to the amazing speakers before me for setting a fantastic tone. So why a restaurant guy is even standing in front of you is a question I think worth looking at. And the answer is actually quite simple. If I'm not throwing the best possible meeting every single day of my life, then I kind of have a problem paying my bills. And that's just the start of it. I chose the profession that I chose because it fills me with passion. Interacting with human beings is what drives me. It's what gets me up every day. So I consider myself a hell of a meeting planner. Without the situation, without the backdrop of a restaurant, of a bar, of a really the most fundamental of all meeting places, right? If you look back through history, what we now know as a pub, or what was once known as a public house, was the one area in town, usually a tavern or an inn, where everyone went. Where everyone went to commune, share ideas, write things like the Declaration of Independence while drinking an enormous amount of alcohol. But it's okay, because back then water wasn't the best thing for you. So the meeting industry, I like to think, kind of started in a restaurant and a bar. And certainly without a restaurant and a bar to bring people together, my career path would be completely nil and void. So I thank the impact that the passion path that y'all have chosen has had on my life, and hopefully vice versa. Many times, though, the valuation system gets skewed from someone's imperception, kind of along the lines of what Roger was speaking of, and it gets kind of negated or becomes a fuzzy filter, and the word service becomes somehow subservient. Subservient means less important. It means diminished. It means standing by to do whatever somebody else is suggesting. None of us are here for that reason. So what I had to figure out was how to create an aesthetic with my staff, the bartenders and restaurateurs that I train under me, to create a value system internally and up their confidence so that they can have a meaningful back and forth with the folks that they are every day interacting with, meeting with. Confidence is what it's all about. And I'm going to illustrate today 3 small examples. I'm going to take a quick tangent. I like the idea that we have to first learn how to play with our primary color crayons before we can make all of the hypercolor masterpieces like when we were 5. When you understand how red and blue works, you are then given the opportunity to understand so much more. So these little instances that I'm going to describe today are fairly rudimentary. One might say common sense, but I believe that there's a great depth and value into looking at them because when you teach yourself that really simple task, that really simple lesson, you're better equipped to think of the more complex scenarios. So my goal, again, is to illustrate these 3 situations. I want to talk about understanding adversity and how using adversity and celebrating adversity can be empowering. I want to talk about flexibility, understanding that there are lines in the sand, but those lines in the sand are only theoretical. that we can empower ourselves with ways to move around those lines or shift those lines, and how important and powerful and confidence-building flexibility is. And lastly, creating internal agents of change. That means affecting the folks that we work side by side with and the folks that work under us so that they become agents of change and thus increase the profound impact of your business outside of the four walls where you do your day-to-day operations. Everybody following me so far? Nice and simple, right? I know these chairs are comfortable, but nobody should be sleeping yet because we'll miss lunch. Okay, so the first one. I'm going to take an example for my adversity illustration of a guest complaint, something that happens in every restaurant or bar, something that happens to all of us in business. At some point, despite our best efforts, we may fail to meet someone's expectation. Then what? Well, in a restaurant, it can be pretty simple. I had a horrible experience, my fish was overcooked, and you didn't do anything about it. Despite the fact that usually we try to do everything we can about it, there are two repercussions of this guest complaint. The first, of course, I'm not even going to get into, and that's the responsibility of leaders and managers in the business to rectify it with the guest. That is actually the simpler of the two. What happens, though, when there is a guest complaint is that it makes a very small smudge on the character and confidence of the person or people that were involved in that interaction. How do we change that? How do we learn from it? Well, historically, and I worked for a long time under a gentleman named Emeril Lagasse, who I'm sure some of you at least have heard of. Emeril didn't believe in sweeping things under the carpet, to say the least. So when there was a guest complaint, we would all come out at the end of service when everybody was tired and just wanted to go home with the cash in their pocket, and he'd say, okay, y'all, we're going to talk about what went wrong tonight. Great. The one thing you don't want to talk about at the end of the day, right? Well, actually, it is right. Because if you make peace with what went wrong, then and there, you can go home without carrying any of that burden, which also happens to have the benefit of enhancing your home life. So when there is a guest complaint at a restaurant, we'll wait until the end of service. We'll grab the people that were involved in that, and we'll do a constructive kind of in-depth analysis. We'll say, okay, well, what went wrong? Simple. Okay, on the front, it was somebody's fish was overcooked. Fine. What are the things that we could have done as a group using each other as a resource to correct that? And we offer everyone an open floor for a creative discussion. There is no wrong answer. And what we find time and time again is that by doing this exercise, you're putting the people that were involved in the negative experience at ease. You're also empowering them to consider themselves problem solvers. Okay, and that is absolutely critical. We are all problem solvers and must need to be problem solvers. So we're building confidence because we're figuring out what went wrong. We're celebrating the fact that something went wrong, and we're using it as a tool to make us better every time. And at the end, everyone leaves with smiles. We shake it off, and that's how it works. The next example I wanted to use is changing that interior, the core, the people. How is that done? Well, there are lots of different mechanics you can use. I found at a certain point in time that I was frustrated with the fact that most of the restaurants that I'd ever worked in or had proximity to had a very distinct way of bringing people up through the ranks. You kind of went in there as maybe a dishwasher or a food runner or a busser, and you just kind of gleaned through osmosis what was happening around you, and then sooner or later somebody would not show up to work, and your manager would say, okay, it's your turn to wait tables or tend bar. That is not the best training method, I have to tell you. So what we started doing was, let's look at a way to inspire change within people. And so we took our entry-level position, which was like a server's assistant, food runner, and we said, okay, believe it or not, you came in here to make money waiting tables, but what you're going to do is work in the kitchen. You're going to understand where all this food comes from, why we make things the way we do, and then you're going to spend time behind the bar. You're going to understand the craft and the trade that's happening here. And that enhanced education, of course, made those underlings far more dynamic than some of the people that were above them in the ranks. So they started putting the pressure on the people above them on the food chain. These people had to learn more. They had to have a better idea of the working chemistry of the restaurant. So just by training the entry-level position a little differently, we saw changes all the way up the ranks. The best change, though, was when those people, despite their position, whether they were running food or bussing tables or waiting tables or tending bar, they had a better one-on-one interaction with the people that they were dealing with because they had the confidence of having seen it all. They understood how, on a very basic level, the entire property worked, and they were proud of that knowledge. Again, confidence. That confidence made more loyal guests. We started seeing people that were coming in specifically to see, bussers. Who ever heard of such a thing? It's amazing. So those people became agents of change. They changed the entire way that our company, that our restaurants were kind of seen from the outside. The third example, of course, is that flexibility line. There's always 1,000 answers to every question, always. It just takes a little creative thinking. So when we set up on a nightly basis, we have what's called a pre-meal meeting, right? I'm sure many of you have a meeting to kick off the day. What are our tasks today? What are we going to get done? What are we going to attack, right? Well, in those meetings, we'd say, what are the 5 top things that we can expect today that might go wrong? Everybody would put in their feedback, and we'd say, okay, or even not go wrong, but what are the 5 questions that we're going to have to handle today? And maybe a question would come up like, well, this person wants to know if they can have this particular dish without the chicken. They'd like it with fish. Okay, so it's just a matter of switching the protein kind of deal. Well, rather than saying, yes, of course, they can do whatever they want, we would say, well, let's say yes, right? Because the answer is always yes, but then what is the answer going to be? Because we don't want a scenario where you're saying, I am pretty sure, but let me check and I'll be right back. You don't ever want to get off a phone with someone and say, well, I'll call you back as soon as I make sure that that's possible. People want to hear yes. They want to know and be confident in the fact that you've got their back, despite whether you work for them, with them, and sometimes against them. So we would give options so that everybody had a sandbox to play in. You give parameters for that flexibility. That enabled people to be able to flex in the moment. They didn't leave a table. They never broke the interaction. They never gave up on that experiential scenario with their guests. Again, this built confidence in our servers, gave them a little bit of swagger, but more importantly than that, it gave our guests the confidence that no matter what, we were always going to solve problems for them. We were always going to make things work to their advantage. Confidence can be a truly, truly amazing thing. And I'd like, well, first of all, before I even go there, does anybody have any questions on any of those 3 very simple scenarios? No, excellent. So if my point then is confidence, and confidence comes from these little subtle maneuverings, welcoming the fact that we screw up and figuring out how to learn from it, being flexible and learning where our sandbox is and how we can affect small changes that make an impact, how we can incite agents of change within our ranks. Those are 3 very, very simple ideas. But all of them will, in fact, manifest in a more profound impact of what you're doing outside of your 4 walls, outside of your business, immediate business field. Meetings are the most fundamental way for us to communicate with each other, right? This is a meeting, even though most of you don't get the opportunity to talk a whole lot. I promise you. So if we're figuring out small steps like this and small little fundamentals for building confidence and enabling each other to push our agenda, to maximize impact, you will see a return. Not just a return financially or in the prowess of the folks that you work with or the acumen or the reputation of the business that you work with, but you will start seeing an immediate return on the investment. To Michelle's point, when you give, people give back. When you raise a standard, you have no choice but to make something clear and stand behind it. That standard will be recognized, and there will be at least one other group that says, we want to do stuff the way they're doing things, because it just flows better. Affecting change is incredibly easy. I think we've covered that in a variety of different ways. Break it down into little bites. Understand that we're all in the same business, and that's talking to humans. It doesn't matter what our discipline is. Understand that talking to humans means listening as well as speaking. And I mean, really, beyond that, there's no obstacle that you cannot overcome. And in my experience, 16 years now, serving people food and drink and dealing with everything from movie stars down to insane people who walk in off the street, which there are more than you'd think. In my experience, this is the way the world works. You know, talk, listen, understand the valuation of what's going on in any conversation. Understand that the meeting is a conversation. And with that understanding and with that confidence, there is nothing that you cannot achieve. I actually trimmed my talk a little bit because I wanted to be able to answer any questions that y'all may have. I'm not going to tell y'all what I'm doing yet, but I am going to open a place here in Atlanta, actually a few. I'm working right now in a consulting company that answers a lot of these kind of big picture questions, not just for restaurateurs, but for real estate developers, for hopefully meeting planners in the future. But any questions, please, I'll open the floor right now. Yes? Absolutely.
How do you do that when people are still emotional and not giving them the chance to settle down so it is a structured?
You know, I actually believe that most people, if you accept that they're emotional and you let them know that it's okay to be emotional for a minute, as long as it can be constructive, they will deflate pretty quickly. The important thing is when you're meeting someone on an emotional level, it's not to be emotional. It takes a responsibility and a frame of mind that says, I am going to be the unemotional one so that they can be emotional, and I'm going to help them down from that. We all have the right to flare up. But actually acting on the energy of when they're emotional is more beneficial than giving everyone time to step back, because when you do that for too long, people start to reimagine what actually took place. It's proven scientifically that we continually, throughout the entire course of our lives, change memories based on input that we get minute to minute. So my memory of when I was 5 at the beach today is nothing like when I was 6 years old, and so on and so forth. So capturing some of that emotional energy actually feeds an emotional dialogue, which will get other people the energy they need to be part of the solution. I know it sounds a little counterintuitive, but all it takes is one mentor in the room being calm and understanding and allowing constructive emotional release. Any other questions? Excellent. Well, thank you all very much for your time today. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Wonderful. Thank you, Greg. I actually do have a question. And in the day and age of social media, where sometimes we're the users and sometimes we're the recipient of that information that can be misconstrued and oftentimes negative, how do you as a restaurateur kind of respond to those people on Yelp and TripAdvisor and all those places where they can trash you and maybe reimagine what really happened?
Yeah, that's a great question. In some ways, we are at the mercy of social media, but I like to believe that people always had opinions. They just didn't have an outlet for them. And we survived for hundreds of years with all of these people's opinions, even though sometimes they were called from windows and sometimes, left with in the manifestation of a nasty note in your locker, right? We got through all of that, so we can get through the social media barrage. The important thing is to understand that when people are using that as a method of release, chances are they're carrying some extra weight that you have absolutely nothing to do with, and you've merely become a catalyst for it. So for my part, to become emotionally charged about something like that doesn't make sense. I need to look at it very, very briefly, comb through, see if there is a kernel of information that needs to be addressed. And if not, just let it roll off my back. And it's a difficult thing at first, but I think like with any other muscle, you exercise that, and eventually you become somewhat immune to it. Yelp started as a way to help people connect and to share ideas and to say, hey, I found this really good Thai restaurant. You want to check it out? Unfortunately, it became this thing where, more people than not use it as kind of a mudslinging brigade. But there are still good, valuable information exchanges happening within those constructs. It's just a matter of combing through them or deciding that that doesn't have an impact on your business and you're not going to pay attention to it. Part of being in the scenario or in the position that we're in is we're interacting with human beings every day face to face. So that far and away takes the lion's share of what drives us as business people. I guess that's hopefully an answer to your question.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Greg.
Be good on Yelp, y'all.